Okay, I think it's happening. There are some people up there I can see. I don't know how many. Anyway, welcome to week 2. How are you guys doing? All doing well? Settling in? Yeah. Okay, so let's start off by remembering what we talked about last week. So, do you remember what we talked about last week, or is it too far back? Too many things have happened in between.
Language. Why it is?
Yes, language. What is language? That is one of the things that we talked about. So, what is language? We had 4 definitions. Okay, so I want 4 different people to tell me each of those definitions. So, the first one is no. Remember, that is the one we said it's not. It's a tool for communication. That's not a definition. So what was definition number 1?
This is has meaning, structure,
Semogenic system. Semogenic system, right? Remember? So we talked about semogenic. Yes. So that was the first definition. What did it mean, semogenic? What is the meaning of semogenic?
Generates meaning.
Makes meaning, right? Okay. So that was the first meaning. What was the second definition?
It's the most valuable inheritance.
It is a socio-semiotic inheritance. What does that mean? A socio-semiotic inheritance?
That has meaning in a society.
The meanings that are made in the society. What about inheritance? The most important thing is the inheritance. What does it mean, inheritance? Why is it language inheritance?
It's passed from generation to generation.
Yeah, fantastic. It's passed, we learn it generation to generation in normal situations, of course. Because language is not biological or material, it's not DNA. Therefore, the transmission of language is cultural or social, right? It's not transmitted through DNA, right? So that's why if a child whose parents speak Chinese is adopted by somebody whose parent, it's adopted by somebody who speaks language Y, then the child will grow up speaking language Y, right? Not Chinese, because it is not hardwired into the DNA. It's socially developed. Now, what that means is, even though it's an inheritance, because it's a biological inheritance, it can be disrupted, right? So it can be disrupted in different ways. So, for example, a child can be adopted, people's language can be suppressed, a child might be forced to learn other schools. In context of Australia's lost generation, or the Australia's stolen generation, the kids were taken away from the families and boarding schools. So there are lots of ways in which that inheritance can be disrupted. Let me wait a second. Let me see if I can turn off the mic. The speaker is not the speaker. Okay. Okay. And does that make sense? So unlike hard material or biological substance, the inheritance of sociosemiotics can be easily disrupted, as opposed to material substances. Okay. What was the third definition? Language is science. What did we mean by that? That language is taxonomy, right? And taxonomies means ways of categorizing and classifying, right? What does that imply?
Knowledge.
Knowledge, absolutely. Ways of knowing, ways of doing, ways of being, right? So why is language science? Because it's got taxonomies, right? It's got the characteristics, it classifies and categorizes. At the same time, what is the other implication of this? What is one other implication of language as science?
Installs people's knowledge as a social system that's passed on and storing something else.
Right. So one of the things it would mean is that each language would be a slightly different science. It will not be exactly the same. Why? Because the way that we categorize things, the way that we classify things in different languages is different. It's not identical, right? Because all languages are different in how they categorize and classify things. Therefore, with each language, the perspective or the view or an understanding of the world will be different. It's not going to be identical. And if you take away somebody's language, then you are taking away their perspective on life and in science. And they essentially, you lose it. Cool. And the fourth definition?
Complex dynamic system.
Language is a complex dynamic system, meaning?
Constantly shifting.
Constantly changing, constantly shifting. It's never the same, right? So one implication of that is that we cannot really write a grammar of next language, right? So if somebody says, here's a grammar of the English language, you can't really take them very seriously because it's almost impossible. It is impossible to write a complete grammar of the English language. Or the most that you can do is write a grammar of a register or a use of language in a very particular context. Because anything else, things get very varied, things change, and you can't have the same consistency. Okay, so those were the four definitions of language we talked about. What else did we talk about last week?
The objectives of the course.
Okay, so the objective of the course, especially, yeah, what is the objective of the course? So just sort of going over and reminding ourselves what we talked about last week. So we talked about the goal of the course, the kind of things that you will do in this course, which is create projects, right? Creating things. So in this semester, in this class, our focus is not to write a traditional research paper, but rather to create practice and then to report on that practice. Okay? That's what we will do. And we'll start with it today. And you will continue doing it through your tutorials as well as lectures. Okay. As we said, pretty much every lecture and tutorial will be focusing on helping you develop your projects. And we'll start off thinking about it today, actually. What else did we talk about last week? We talked about the material senses. But before we talked about the material senses, we also talked about yes. So the world divided into a category that is material and the world that is not material. Within the world that is material, we have physical material, everything, and a subset of it is biological, right? So biological is a subset of everything that is material, right? And then on the other hand, we looked at socio-semiotics. We did not explore the socio-semiotic space as much last week. And we might do a little bit today, but we will probably do that even later on. Okay, so then focusing on the material, what did we talk about? Senses. Of how we as human beings receive stimuli from our environment through the five senses, right? And I think, as I mentioned last week, and I just want to stress that, this stimulus that we get from the material world by itself has no meaning. Whether you see something, whether you read something, whether you look at it, hear something, it has no meaning by itself. The meanings are given by us. Okay. In fact, the same color which we think as a material color might not even appear as the same color to everybody in this room. It might look and be slightly different because of our perceptual habitation. The way that we perceive things is slightly different. So even though it's the same physical entity, we will not all see it because we may not be attuned to seeing it. So especially this can happen very often in sort of cases of colors, right? So if you are very attuned, are there people in this room who are really good with colors, who know a lot of names of colors and can differentiate between colors? Anybody here? Really? Nobody with that developed sense of visual? Being able to identify all the various different colors and shades of colors? But you know there are people, right? So for them, they see one shade and another shade, they know it's a different color and this is the name of this color. They say two different colors. But for me, I just see one color. I just see red. But other people will see, I don't know what different shades of reds there are, right? But I will just see a red. So in a sense, the sense of perception itself shifts because of how you see the world through your language, but also other ways of knowing. So our worlds are not the same, and therefore, of course, the interpretations that we make of that world are also not identical. So we looked at that last week. We talked about the material senses, the 5 senses. Then within the material senses, we differentiated them in terms of 2 factors, which were proximity and ingestion, right? And we sequenced the 5 senses. What was the sequence? Sight, sounds, smell, touch, taste. You can think of it in terms of the proximity, right? It's the most highly proximus to negative proximity. That's a good way of remembering it. Okay. And why is it important to put that in a sequence? Why is it important to put the 5 sensory systems in that sequence? It can help us to understand human relationships. The more shared our material senses are with somebody else, the closer we are to them. In general, right? In general, not always, of course. And the less we share the material senses with us, the less we know somebody. So in a sense, it helps us understand human relationships, but it also helps us understand, for example, how we are able to survive, how we are able to use the various senses in order to identify danger, right, and other things. So looking at the importance and the significance of these 5 senses. Now, what else did we talk about? We talked about the difference, what language is, in the sense of the sensory system, that language is only sound. Yeah? So let me draw this back again, and we'll go from there a bit. You remember we talked about the senses, right? So sight, sound, smell, touch, and taste. Yeah. Now, within these 5 senses, we already have the hierarchy. Remember what we talked about? That sound language is a subset of sound frequencies. So language, what we call language, is a subset of sound frequencies. Actually, not is, it operates through a set of restricted sound frequencies, right? So language is not even all the sounds. It's a set of sound frequencies that humans use in order to use what we call language, right? And we also talked about how sound is not restricted to language, but that there are many different ways in which sound creates meanings. Okay. Now, for example, if you live around Newtown or Merrickville or the Inner West, then you will realize that we are actually in a sort of on the flight path. So most of the airplanes that land fly over the sort of the inner west and Newtown and this area, right? I live in Newtown. Now, every morning, I know when it is 6 o'clock. The curtain is down, everything is closed, but I know it is now past 6 o'clock. How do I know? I don't look at the clock. I don't look at the sun outside, but I know it is past 6 o'clock. Cool, right? So if I hear the sound of the airplane in the morning, it signifies to me that it is past 6 o'clock in the morning. Yeah? Now notice this sound that I have used to help me identify the time is not language. But even though it is not language, it helps me create meanings. Yeah? So remember, this is extremely important. So when we talk about sound and language, only one aspect of sound is language. There are many other aspects of sound, right? Music. Are there any musicians in this room? Yeah. Anybody else? Any musicians? Just one. What do you play?
Piano, guitar, drums.
Cool. 3 things down. Fantastic. Okay. We'll have to have a performance.
I will, whenever you guys like it.
When we have the orientation next Friday.
Okay.
Bring it. Okay. Okay. All right. So you see that the sound is just one subset. Similarly, remember we differentiated writing or reading. Ability to read is sight, right? Language is sound. Reading is eyes. So when we talk about literacy, the ability to read and write, we are really talking about here. So literacy operates through a subset of the visual. Okay. Now through this, what I was trying to do last week is to show you that language is not equal to literacy. Yeah? Because language is primarily sound and literacy is primarily visual. Okay? Did we in this section talk about the writing systems? No? Did we talk about the writing systems last week? Okay, good. So let's extend that a bit. So now let's expand this understanding. Why is language and literacy two different things? Because now very often, most of us learn that, maybe we not even taught this. We just learn but through experience that what you speak and how you write are interlinked, right? Especially if you're learning to write through a European language. Essentially, you learn that the way that you speak turns into a sound spelling system, right? So you spell cat, you say cat, you spell C-A-T, cat, correct? So because we do this, because we write cat, and we pronounce it cat, whatever we say, however our pronunciation is. Because there is a relationship between the script and the sound in English and in most Western languages, it's very easy for us to assume that there is an inherent relationship between writing systems and sound systems. That what we have essentially in writing systems is a mapping of the sound onto different characters. So you have a symbol and a sound, a symbol and a sound. So the relationship is a sound-symbol relationship. This is how we often grow up and develop our understandings of language and literacy. So it is not uncommon for us to have been taught or understand that speaking and writing are two modes of language. Right? We are taught sometimes that speaking and reading are a continuum. That there's a spoken language and there is reading language. And we think that language can be either spoken or language can either be written. Correct? Is that what you think? Right? Most of us think that language can either be spoken or language can either be written. Now, what we are doing through our lectures last week and this week is to realize that is not correct. That language, speaking and reading are not two modes of language. They cannot be, because they operate on different sensory systems. We can understand this by looking at it in multiple ways. For example, we can realize it through looking at the sensory systems themselves. So it is possible that a person does not have sight, but they may still have ability to hear and communicate. Yes? So if a person doesn't have sight, they can still speak, right? But if a person cannot hear or speak, they don't have language. They have to learn sign language, and they can learn reading. But reading and writing, they can learn because it is through sight, not because it's through oral. And that is the differentiation. The very differentiation of the physical sensory systems tell us that these are two different mechanisms. But even though we can see that there are two different sensory systems, it's very often the case that we get confused and we think of them as continuum because most of us write like this. Right? Everybody in this room has learned to write like this. Now, this is only one way in which you can create writing systems. Now, writing system, as we said, is visual. Right? So if writing system is visual, so writing systems are visual, they're all visual, correct? All writing systems are visual. Okay. Now, if a writing system is visual, you need your eyes to see it. Now, just as we were saying earlier, a person who can see but does not hear or speak can still use sign language and can still read. Yeah? So a person who never learns to orally speak language can still learn language through sign language in the writing system. This means these two are independent. Now, if these two are independent, if sight and sound are independent, then if you were to make a writing system, if you were to create a writing system, then you can do it in many different ways. Okay. The first way in which you can create a writing system is where it is semantically oriented, semantic. What I mean is that the writing symbol is a meaning. Okay. The other option is that there is a relationship with sound, sound-based. Okay. So a writing system can be purely visual and semantic, which means it has no information about how to pronounce the character. Do you know any language here that uses semantic features of the visual script system? Anybody here? A majority of you speak it. Chinese. Chinese, right? So Chinese is a semantic script, right? The character of a Chinese writing, the characters that you have in Chinese, do they tell you exactly how to speak it? Do they have a pronunciation attached? No. There might be some radicals. So for example, it might mean you might have a marker for the Beijing R, right? So the markers for different things. But in general, it doesn't matter what your dialect of Chinese is, you can all read kanji, right? Even people who live in Japan can read it. If you want to learn it in Australia, you can learn it. It makes no difference. Why? Because the sound and the visual are not connected. Okay? So for example, is somebody here who speaks Cantonese? Okay, cool. Somebody here who speaks Shanghainese? Shanghainese? No? Ningbonese? Oh, you do? Okay. You're from Ningbo? Close? Okay. I just wanted to give an example. So if somebody speaks to you in Cantonese, can you understand them? No. If somebody speaks to you in Ningbonese, can you understand them? Not really. Not really, right? You can't understand each other. So what it means is that if you are speaking to each other, you are not mutually intelligible. But if you write something, can he read it? And if he writes something, can you read it? Now, why is that the case? Why is it the case that all people who learn the Chinese script can understand each other through writing, even if they cannot speak to each other? The answer is right here. Because the Chinese writing system uses visual. It uses sight and it uses semantics. So a character represents a meaning, which is not the case with most other languages. Most other languages in the world use a sound-based script, like English, like Spanish, right? Like Korean. They all use, or like Japanese, right? They all use sound-based systems, not meaning-based systems. Do you see that there is now actually not just this question of a differentiation between two types of scripts, but also we can see that there is a clear hierarchy. One of them is better than the other. The visual system is better than a system that is sound-based. Why? Because sight is independent of sound. There is no reason to link symbols to sound. It is not an inherent requirement. Okay. Now, this is another reason, the fact that you can have scripts that are semantic and you can have scripts that are sound-based, again implies that language and literacy are disconnected. Because one, it means if literacy can exist through semantics, then there is no sound involved. Anybody who learns to read the Chinese script, even if they don't read, it cannot speak any word of any dialects of Chinese, can still communicate through the script. Correct? Why? Because it is visual. It is purely visual. It takes advantage of the visual system of language, as opposed to sound-based scripts, because sound-based scripts imply that every time you have a change in the dialect, your spellings will change. So if imagine in China, instead of using a visual or semantic script, they use a sound-based script. Do you think that a Cantonese and the Ningbonese can communicate with each other in writing? No, they will not be. So notice here the importance and the use and the need of the writing system. Also notice that as far as I know, Chinese is the only language that exists today that uses this kind of a script. I don't know of any other language. Now, that is a huge advantage to the Chinese population because it allows them to communicate to a very large group of people who all speak different languages or speak different dialects, right? Because they cannot communicate orally. They speak differently. Now, think of it, the implications. Remember, our goal in this class is not just talk about theory, but keep thinking about the implications in real world. Imagine and compare, for example, two countries, one India and the other China. Over the last 30 years, the Chinese population has started reducing, whereas the Indian population is continuing to expand. I think it is more than Chinese population today. There are more people in China today, sorry, in India today than in China. The populations have skewed. For example, look at in terms of both China and India were colonized in different ways. But China has been able to overcome its colonization and change its position, socioeconomic position, whereas India has not. Now, of course, it's not simple to say it's one reason. It's never one reason, but script plays a very important role. What the Chinese script allows people to be able to achieve is something can never be achieved in India. Why? Because they use sound-based scripts. Even dialects, even languages that are mutually intelligible use different scripts. Now, this is, I often talk about the reason that China has been able to overcome colonization as opposed to any other country that I know of is very importantly a huge contribution of this script. Now compare what to that, as I said, India. Now what happened in India is that they have multiple scripts. It's the opposite of what China is. In China, you have oral languages that people cannot understand, right? They're mutually unintelligible, like Cantonese and Ningbo-nese and other dialects. In South Asia, on the other hand, it's the other way around. Hindi and Urdu are mutually intelligible. So I speak Urdu. If somebody speaks Hindi, we can have a conversation, not a problem. Many languages across North India are mutually intelligible, at least one way mutually intelligible. But all of them use different writing systems. So in Urdu, we use the Persian-Arabic letters. But in Hindi, they use Devanagari letter script. Same language, mutually intelligible. Imagine this, imagine that you speak Cantonese, right? Imagine that all of you speak Cantonese, but then half of you use one script to write Cantonese, and the other group uses a different script to write Cantonese. Bizarre, right? Really bizarre. So imagine everybody speaks the same language, but half of you use one script, the other half of you use the other script. Guess what will happen as a result? Can you predict some of the consequences?
Less power.
Divide, people become divided. You divide people based on the script. So whereas the Chinese script unifies people, the use of two different scripts to write Hindi and Urdu, even though they are the same language orally, they're the same language in terms of oral, but using two different writing systems divides the groups. It divides the people and creates conflict between the two. It also means that over a period of time, the two languages will change in different ways. For so long, everybody has been changing and moving along. But now they're going to go to two different directions because the script will influence the language itself. And so essentially what happens in South Asia is that the writing systems function to divide and rule. It divides people. As opposed to China, the semantic system where you're able to unify the people who speak different dialects. So the writing systems are not random. Writing systems are not arbitrary. They actually have a very important purpose and function to serve in our communities and societies. Unfortunately, in most cases, people never think about a script. In fact, if you look at a lot of the linguistic research that happens around the world, when linguists go out and they create new scripts for new languages, guess what they do? They use sound-based scripts, not semantic scripts. So the linguists make a contribution that is actually contrary to the benefit of the community. Because the community doesn't have a writing system, it doesn't know better. But if I'm going to go in and offer them something, then it better be a good thing. But if I give them something bad, then guess what will happen? Bad results will happen. And this is one of the problems with linguistics as a discipline, which I will talk about later. Now, sound-based scripts can be of two different types. They can be syllabic or they can be phonetic. Syllabic scripts means the whole syllable is captured by one character. For example, what is the Japanese script? Hiragana? Yeah? What are the other Japanese scripts? Katakana, Hiragana, they are syllabic. Cherokee in North America, the Cherokee language script is a syllabic script. The whole syllable is captured by one character. As opposed to phonetic, where there is only one sound, one character. This is one syllable, one character. This is one sound, one character. Okay. Let me quickly ask a question. Do you know the difference between phonetic and syllabic? Phonology and syllable? Do you know what a syllable is? Okay.
The smallest unit of sound.
Okay, forget the definitions. Let's just look at the word semantic. So system. System has two syllables, sys, right? System. Can you say system? Say system. System. Right? System, right? You've got two units that you put together. Now in English, when you put a unit together, when you put two units together, each unit revolves around a vowel sound. So there is a consonant, a vowel, a consonant. Right? That's what you have here, right? Consonant, vowel, consonant. So essentially, what you need for a syllable is one vowel and one consonant somewhere. But it can be more than one consonant. So in English, you can have words like trump, right? Consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant. You can have word like scramble. Scramble, which is scramble 3. So consonant, consonant, consonant. Vowel, consonant, consonant, consonant. And if you say scrambled, you have even one more. But not all languages are like this. So in English, a syllable, this is a whole syllable. Because one vowel with all associate consonants. But in Japanese, how do the sounds work? Yamaha, Suzuki. What is it like? Consonant, vowel. That's it. You cannot have another consonant here. Not possible. So it's only consonant vowel. Suzuki, Yamaha, Yokohama, right? Just think of it. You always have that, right? Because you got a consonant and a vowel combination. Each language is different. But the key idea is for a syllable, you have one vowel and all the consonants that come on both sides of it. When you go to the next vowel, you change the syllable. So, system, right? It could even be systems. Terms will still be one, the same consonant. But if I say systematic, then systematic has more vowel syllables. Systematic. How many syllables now? Systematic. Yeah, because you go by the vowels. The vowel sounds tell you where the markers are. And then the consonants go both sides. So a syllabic script is one where you will have the whole syllable. Imagine, of course, this is not true, but imagine if I say instead of cis, every time I see cis, I just put this sign. So one sound represents the whole combination. Sorry, one symbol. One symbol represents the whole syllable, as opposed to one letter, one sound. Right? So when you have one letter, one sound, you have a phonetic alphabet. Like English, like German, and others. Why? Because one sound, one letter. Whereas in syllabic scripts, one symbol will capture a whole syllable. The whole syllable will be just one symbol. So in terms of efficiency, in being able to compensate for variations in pronunciation, the syllabic script is a better script. Because the symbol is capturing a whole syllable. So if there are different ways in which we pronounce the syllable, so for example, some of you don't say sis, some of you say sus. It doesn't matter because those variations will be neutralized in the spelling system. So a syllabic spelling system may have more characters than a phonetic script, but it is much more efficient for certain languages because it captures a whole syllable and therefore it compensates for the dialectal variations within a group. Does that make sense? Any questions? Does it make sense why the writing system and the spoken system are two different sensory systems? Do you see why language and literacy, to equate them, is a problem? Now, this again, remember, this course is about real life implications. It's not just about theory. We can see very theoretically, it's pretty clear. But when you see the real world, you don't see an application of this anywhere. Our education is primarily based on literacy. As soon as a child goes to school, they are expected to know how to read, or very early on, right? Now, in terms of human development, did we talk about this last week? We go this way. In terms of educational institutions, we go this way. That's one of the clashes that we have, right? In terms of how people learn, children especially, learn and develop in natural situations using all 5 senses, not just sight and sound, but taste, touch, and smell. Children do this way more than adults. Perhaps because of the schooling, because taste, touch, and smell are extremely crucial to our human survival, right? Our ability to survive is dependent on these 3. So it's extremely important that we learn about these distinctions and how they operate. Now, any questions? Any questions about this? Should I erase it? I will ask you again next week. I will give you a quiz. All right. So, okay. So, remember, these are material stuff, material senses. The material stimuli, the stimuli that we get is of many different types. It's not one. So as a person who has whatever the sensory system, imagine, notice I keep talking about the 5, but it's totally possible that you don't have one of them or 2 of them. You can still operate. It makes no difference. All it means is that the other sensory systems compensate or do other things to extend the meaning range, right? So it's not that we must have these, but we do have the potential of. Now, we get these stimuli, we just get the stimuli. It is us who parse the stimuli, that is separated out into different components. It is us who identify, for example, words from other visual stimuli. It is us that recognizes the characters and then put those words together, right? But that is not happening by sight itself. So in terms of our material systems, our parts of bodies that are engaged in these senses, yes, there are certain parts of our body which are more engaged with certain types of sensory systems. But regardless of what it is, what sensory system we are dealing with, the stimulus that we receive by itself has no meaning. It has no meaning. It has no reality. Not that it is not physically present, it is, but it doesn't have meaning to us. Unless we shift this through an interpretive framework. Interpretive framework. So the stimuli has to be interpreted through some sort of an interpretive framework. Essentially, everything that we know or we think that we know is an outcome or a reflection of this interpretive framework. This is everything that our mind does. Taking all those stimuli, processing it in context, in real time, right, to shifting things. And these frameworks then create the reality and the world around us. These interpretive frameworks are socio-semiotic. They include things like culture, language, religion, beliefs, economy, whatever. Any kind of beliefs, anything that is not itself material, physical, is socio-semiotic. Of course, all of these interact with each other. It's not like culture is independent of language, or which is independent of religion, which is independent of other beliefs. It can't be, because they're all aspects of the interpretive framework. They work together. In different times, we interpret the same event from a slightly different focus because of the different context we might be in. The interpretations shift. They're not always constant. They're not always consistent. How we see the world today might be different from how we see the world tomorrow. Things will change. Right? Our interpretive frameworks are the dynamic systems. They're constantly in flux. They're never stable. That's why none of this is stable. How can any of this be stable if the interpretive frameworks are not stable? So the interpretive framework itself, whatever it might be, this is too broad a category in a sense, just everything. Everything through which we make sense of these stimuli. That's where these are big questions. We don't know. We'll have to explore them in time. Any questions? That's the distinction that we are going to work with. Why is language an interpretive framework? We talked a bit about this last week. Why is language not material? Consciousness, right? Why? Because the material sound in itself has no language meaning. We, in a social context, in our social semiotic, give meanings to particular sounds. So, for example, the word red has a meaning, right? Why does it have a meaning? Because we have identified that this combination of characters, or the sounds that represent these characters, that combination of characters or sounds is a referent for a cat. Sorry, for a rat. I can say chuha. What is chuha? Now notice the visual representation has changed because I'm using a different script system. I'm using a different writing system. It's still a phonetic writing system. Che, wow, he, alif, chu, ha. It's still a phonetic script. Chu, ha. Chu, ha is red. It's the same word. It's the same thing. Now, in one language, we take one sequence of sound and give it a meaning. The stimuli is the sound or the visual, and we give it the meaning of a red. In another language, it can be a chuha. It's another sequence of sounds. In Cantonese, what do you call it? In Mandarin, something else. In Spanish, it changes, right? In Vietnamese, we have somebody from Vietnam here, right? So it changes, right? Notice how the sound sequence changes, and the writing can change as well. The meaning is not in the sound itself. The meaning is in the interpretation. Therefore, language is socio-semiotic. It is not material. So it's not. Well, this is another problem why people think that language is material, because we hear it. But language is not material. The sound is material. Sound is material. Language is not. To differentiate the two. Now, the reason we want to keep differentiating the two is because by doing this, we can start learning how certain things mean and are interpreted by and in a particular community or a group. Right? Different groups, different communities may interpret the same thing in different ways. So how do we interpret, how do various people interpret it? How do people use this? That's one ability that we can develop out of this. Now, in your tute, I think especially a bit tomorrow and more the next week, they will cover some of these issues about the relationship between this. Essentially, what we will take you into doing is what we call broad PDA. Broad PDA implies broad positive discourse analysis. Now, on the discussion board, I gave you guys a discussion question. By the way, I've read all the responses. They're all good. I may not agree with some of them, but that's fine. They're all very good. Now, the question was, what was the question? I gave you a link to a reading, right? And I asked you 3 questions. The first question was, is it accessible to people with low literacy or no literacy? What would you do if you wanted to make it more accessible? And third was to zero in and focus on how would you develop material that can help people to identify between real news and fake news. Yeah? So the material is so this article, right? Now, you guys are all pretty accurate that this material, in the way that it is written, very heavily text-based, is not something that is designed for people with low literacy. If somebody cannot read or somebody has very poor reading skills, then for them to read this is going to be difficult. But of course, my question was also a bit out of context because this is a Harvard University website, right? Random people will not go there to look for this information, right? So unless you go and look for this information, you won't find it. But so in a sense, the people who will go look for it are the people who will be able to read it. But think about it this way, because we are human beings, most likely we have fallen sick at least once in our life, right? And we have taken medicine at least once in our life. We might have even gone to a pharmacy and bought medicines at least once in our life. Now, when you go to a pharmacy and you buy medicine, what else do you get with the medicine? You get an information sheet, right? Now, different countries have different ways in which they provide you information sheets. In some places, you get a cough syrup, and inside the cough syrup, there was a little paper that's packed inside it that tells you about the medicine, about its contraindications, such as what are some of the bad things can happen to you if you take this medicine, right? What are some of the negative consequences? All those stuff. That's all in that little information sheet. Have you seen those? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Have you read those? No. Very few of you read them. Do you understand it? Not everything. Now, think of this as another example. Now, actually, you guys are highly literate, but you will have difficulty understanding the medical leaflet. Imagine if a person has no literacy or has very little literacy. Can they read the information that comes with the medicine? Now, if they cannot read and understand the information that comes with this medicine, what are some of the potential consequences? They can die. If they take the medicine wrongly, they use it, or if it's an antibiotic and they stop using it after day 1, they don't follow the regular dosage, things can happen to them. There are real world implications. But regardless, the kind of leaflets are pretty useless. Now, this is a huge gap. This is something some of you might think of as doing your project on. Designing medical leaflets that are accessible to people who have low or no literacy. And that is extremely important because true, if you live in Sydney or if you live in a big city, then yes, most people do have ability to read and have literacy. But if you go outside the cities, or if you go work with working class people or labor class or lower socioeconomic strata, then the literacy is not high. For the majority of the people in the world, the literacy skills are not very high. They may have some very basic literacy. They may be able to recognize the characters, but they cannot make meaning or sense out of big reading checks. So to provide them information about things like law or medicines or healthcare and or the other sort of information, social information in a format that they cannot access is essentially counterproductive or non-productive. It's not bringing any effects. We use a lot of resources to create it, but it has no impact. So wouldn't it be a better idea than to redesign this information in a way that we can access different target communities? Now, thinking about fake news, it's global, it's everywhere. Now, the largest source of fake news today is social media. Yeah, whether it's whatever the social media might be. Now, different social media, there are tons of different social media. And different social media cater to different audiences. Right, there are social media for younger people, different age groups, different sort of national groups. There are tons of different things. But we know that regardless of what the social media is, a lot of the social media is where a lot of this fake news gets generated and promoted. And that's a cause for concern because it affects everybody. Okay. Now, have you guys been able to watch the video lecture? Huh?
The last lecture?
No, the one that already recorded? Okay, please watch it, all right? So I won't repeat things that I'm saying here in what Aurelie says. So Aurelie will, and she will partly talk about it in the queue, but she's done it in the video recording. She talks about the credible approach to research. Right, so research has to be contextually relevant. It has to respond to a real world situation. It's in your reading as well, right? So it's also in the lecture through an example. Now, that's the kind of projects that I want us to do this semester. We want us to do credible projects. Now, the way we are going to proceed through the semester is that we are going to use what we call the teaching learning cycle. Now, the teaching learning cycle, you will learn a lot more about in educational linguistics. But I'll give you a little sense of what we will do. So the teaching learning cycle is something that you will learn in lots of detail when you are in your educational linguistics unit, which for some of you will be next semester and some of you will be next year. It will be split. You start with the phase called deconstruction. Now, deconstruction is essentially the phase where in teaching, you give examples, you give models, you tell the reasons, you explain, you elaborate, you detail, you provide examples, all that stuff. You talk about how things are done, you go look at all the steps. So in a sense, what we have done in week 1, what we are doing here today, what we will do also in the next week is all part of the deconstruction, getting you involved, telling you about it. In the queue tomorrow, Aurelie or Li Cheng, you guys will be with Li Cheng, she will go through examples of projects. You already have examples of projects in the book, right? In the book that I gave you online. So that's all part of deconstruction, showing and elaborating and explaining and expanding on what the models are. The next stage in the teaching learning cycle is what we call joint construction. Now, joint construction is a very important step which is often missed in a lot of traditional teaching. Joint construction is when your teachers and tutors work with you in order to work with you to create a project of the type that they want you to learn. Notice this. First, just talking about it, giving examples, showcasing it, giving examples, then working together to create another model. And then, once we have done the joint construction, which is we have all worked together to create something like what I want you to do, only after we have done this will you work on your independent project. So essentially, independent construction, which is your assignment, doesn't happen. The final assignment doesn't really happen unless we have done joint construction. So what we're doing at this stage is essentially all deconstruction. There will be more of it in your tutorials as well. Once we have done this, we will start moving you towards joint construction. And that's what we're doing, what I'm doing right now. I'm telling you what we are going to be focusing on. What are we going to focus on? Identification of fake news. This is a real world problem. A real world problem is that people in different groups, different age ranges, using different social media, don't have the skills or the training or the ability to identify or differentiate between fake news and real news. This has huge real world consequences. So our joint project is to develop resources that we can share on social media that can be used by people to be able to learn how to differentiate between real news and fake news. That is something that is our job for our joint construction activity. We are going to do this over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Fake news on social media or in video?
Social media at the moment. We'll keep our focus on social media. Okay. So fake news and social media. And our goal, our project goal for this joint construction is to develop resources, either individually or in groups, up to you, for a specific type of audience and a specific type of social media that will help the people who engage on that social media be able to learn to differentiate between fake news and not fake news. And in a specific, we want to focus on coronavirus only. Okay? So the material that we develop will focus on coronavirus. Of course, fake news is about everything, right? But we are not going to develop resources for everything. We will develop resources only for the fake news. Now, we will give you examples. We will work through this. To be able to do this, Aurelie and Li Cheng will explain this to you again in the tutorial tomorrow. But we are going to give you a homework. And your homework will be pretty easy. You have to do two things. One, find examples of fake news on a social media. Right? And second, find examples of resources that are available on social media that are developed to educate people about the use, about differentiating fake news. Right? So, one, examples of fake news itself. Of course, we will give you all this stuff in writing later on. And two, examples of resources that are used to educate people on social media about fake news. Two sets of examples. Now, as Aurelie and Li Cheng will talk about it, this is not due until next Wednesday. Okay, not tomorrow, next Wednesday. So you have 1 week. Now, we will also share all these things in detail. Now, why do you want me to do this? Because when you bring the examples of good resources, we will carry out a broad positive discourse analysis. Right? We will do that again. Orally and Lee Cheng will deconstruct and model it for you. And then you guys will be asked to do it yourself. We're going to go stage by stage by stage. Once we have all done this project, then we are all on the same page in the sense of we know what we have to do. Now, one thing that we are going to skip at that stage, at least not do it in too much detail, is literature review. We will focus on a very different type of doing a literature review later on after we have done this joint construction. We'll do a literature review around the same thing, another cycle. So essentially, the teaching learning cycle keeps going and continues, keeps going and going and going. Deconstruction, joint construction, independent construction, deconstruction, goes on, right? It's a cycle. Now, those of you who are in linguistics, you would have received a message from me saying, we don't recommend that you take FAS 7001 and 7002. Some of you wrote and asked me why. The reason is simple. Because FAS 701 and 7002 are designed as extra English language classes for university students, postgraduate students, but they're designed very generically. They're very generic. Any person from any department can take it, right? So there is not enough focus. We want our students to develop literacy in the context of our discipline, right? So we want you to develop your ability, language and literacy in the context of applied linguistics. To do that, we are going to keep using the teaching learning cycle so that we can teach you about the language and the literacy at the same time as the content. Okay? So we will tell you how to do the writing. We will give you examples of how good writing works. We will give you workshops on how to do your own writing. Okay? So that's all integrated within this course. That's why we don't want you to take an extra unit. There's no point. Take a content unit instead of taking a FAS unit. Okay, questions?
Our attendance, our
Thank you for reminding me. Actually, I do have it. I have it actually open, but I think we can do it online. I've never tried this. Let's try this. If I go to attendance here, now this is today. We didn't do it last week. Barry Chen, Shipping Dong. It's actually good. Jim Du. Maybe they're online. Priya. Chang Yao Fang Chao. Maybe online. Feng Yulin. Carlos. Tracy Gao. Regan, sorry. Xingping Wei. Han Yukai. Hewitt Ben. Can I talk to you guys after the class? How is she good? Jia Shunji. And Peter. Esther. Yasir Khamis. Adrian. This is actually useful. I'm going to learn how your names work as well. It's going to take a while. Lee Junship. Mavis Lee. Liang Yu. Clay Liu. Dan Liu. Liu Shenzhen. Raphael, Audrey, Melba, Zia Mao, Jane McDonald, She Kibo, Pan, Ivan, Ji, friend? Mariana?
Yes.
Shibe? Shang? QJ? Bella? Margaret? Mia? Natalie? Chen? Wang Hiao? Wang Yun? Hui Shu? Ye Jun Yu? Satu? Ye Chen Chen? Yu Manu? Yuan Chu? Mariana? Clara Zhang? Shu Yuan Zhang? Zhang Xingbi? Zhao Yike? No. Annie Ju? Okay, so yeah, this is good. All right, so if no other questions, then I will see you guys next week. Don't forget your tutes tomorrow. Regarding the tutes, I noticed there is a huge slant. There are way more people at 3 o'clock than at 12 o'clock. So if it's possible at all, can some of you transfer to 12 o'clock? Is it good for any of you? Can you guys do the 12 o'clock? So 3 o'clock? Okay. All right, so yeah. If you can change, just do it online. Yeah, just go to the 12 o'clock tute. Okay, cool. Everybody, see you later.